Brent, you had mentioned commitments earlier, and I want to get some best practices from you on managing commitments on a leasing project. What are some of the things that come to mind?
Man, it's the hardest thing because it's like if you ask somebody to define a commitment, you probably get three or four different answers. And I think, the thing that's challenging about commitments is it's at what point in time do you actually commit something, and the one thing that is constant about a leasing job, the second a company says, hey, go lease, that's getting attention all the way up to the top. And there's pressure on the in-house guy to produce. There's pressure on, his land manager to produce and show that we're getting acreage because he has to answer all the way up to the top most often. And so you have to fight that urge to show progress, um, as opposed to show progress with some accuracy. And that's the challenge, right? If you've got a greenfield leasing project where you're picking up the phone and calling off old leases, well, it's hard to say how many net acres you have committed, right? Because you haven't titled that. You're trying to get ahead of things and you're trying to catch up with title as best you can. Um, for us, best practices, we try not to commit something until we can associate a dollar amount to it. It means ultimately acreage makes you feel good, but you got to be accountable for the dollars that you're exposing your client to. And so it's finding that balance. Communication is a big deal. Anytime we go into a new leasing project with a new client, we spend an exhausting amount of time talking about, okay, what's your situation in house? What are your standards for commitments? How do you need to see it? Is it important just to see the acres, or do you really need to see the dollars? And that helps us kind of make some decisions on when we hit go on a given commitment. And also they need to understand where we are in that process, and our client needs to know so that they can answer to things on the meeting about, okay, well, this commitment's there. How much is that? Well, they need to know where we are in the process and how that works and how we got to that. Um, those are the best practices. Is if you can help it, don't commit something until you can associate dollars to it, and that equates to net acres. But if you have to jump the gun and really get aggressive with reporting commitments, everybody's got to be on the same page as to what that means. And they have to understand that that can change between when you say that's committed and when you actually in hand that lease because you verify the title.
Yeah.
Um, that's the biggest thing.
Yeah, William, what is anything from your side that you want to add for that?
Well, I think as Brent, as you were saying that, what was going through my mind was, um, it's important for the in-house landman to know what you're giving your broker, and the instructions, the not only the right instructions, but also, um, the in-house landman needs to have an idea of the time frame that it takes for what you're giving that broker. And you really don't, unless you've worked in the field, you don't have to be the best you don't have to be the fastest and the most efficient in the courthouse. You I think every landman needs to know how to go out and run records, um, and do things in the field, buying right away for a little bit of time, and spending time doing those sorts of tasks that you're asking these guys to do. So you give them, um, you give your broker some work, and it's been sitting on your desk for 6 weeks, and you call them 2 days later and go, hey, where is this? And the broker's going, man, I literally just got this, and this is some really hard title, right? This is really intense. And the in-house landman didn't have any idea of the time frame that you need, right? So you have, uh, they're not managing the expectations of their work, in house. So that's where a lot of, projects can get a little disjointed. With the in house guy doesn't understand the real scope and the difficulty of what they're asking their broker to do. You know, they just see it go out and they see it come back, and uh, it's they don't see everything that goes into it. How many man hours that these guys spent in a hotel room away from their family, at working at night just to get this thing back to you because you let it sit on your desk for 6 weeks. They're going to get it to you, right?
William, I'll send you your 20 for saying that. I appreciate that, man. I mean, that's a big thing.
20?
Managing it. 20 and a cheeseburger. How about that?
Yeah.
It's managing expectations. You nailed it. I mean, that's the thing. And not every field person understands the in-house land job, and not every in-house land person understands the field component. But if you could communicate effectively and efficiently and from a broker's perspective, manage those expectations. An in-house guy may have been working at Oklahoma Asset for the last 3 years or the first 3 years or 5 years of his or her career. And all of a sudden they're out in the Permian Basin or in East Texas. They've got a mental picture of how long something should take if they ask for it.
Yeah.
But just because it took that long in one state or one basin doesn't mean that translates to the next place you're working. So you have to manage expectations, and you have to speak truthfully and honestly based on your experience about how long you feel like this is going to take and what to expect, when running mineral title, in a certain county. And it can vary from county to county in a region. And that's where that trust comes in again. You have to trust that if your broker's telling you something, you need to be able to take it to the bank and go down the hall and say, hey man, this is why this is taking longer. And you need to believe and trust that, and not try to put expectations from another basin onto your projects that's in a different part of the world.
But it comes back to when I first started as an independent, one of the first brokers that I worked for, his kind of a motto, he's like, do you want it right or do you want it right now? That's two different answers. And so, and that's where the managing expectations comes from, is in my mind, is working for him is, do you want it right or do you want it right now? And so it can be tough on especially these young landmen that comes directly out of college in-house and they never go out to the field. It can happen. It happens mostly in that scenario. Once you get some time under you and you've had a project or two, you get better at it. But there can be some real heartburn there on both sides. In-house, you got to fade some heat, and you might run through a couple brokers that the broker just goes, I don't have time. Well, that's translated as, I'm not working for that guy again.
Yeah.
It's
the right now in today's time, to William's point earlier, so much has changed. And as all these fields mature, and it just gets more difficult, title gets more complex, working interest gets more complex. You add a horizon and it's a multiplier. And we really run into problems in today's world, especially in the Permian Basin, is if you're having to rush. And you just never feel like what you turn in is, you never feel comfortable with it. It's hard to feel comfortable in general because this stuff is so complicated at times. But if you're really having to rush through it, God, it's brutal. And kind of to that point, I'm getting a little bit off topic, but you can rush. There are ways to expedite things, but it comes at a cost. It's maybe a little more efficient to have one person doing something, but if you really got to have it, there's ways to put multiple people on it. You separate certain components of the work and you can put it together.
Yeah.
You have to find that balance between, hey, I'm in a pickle, I got to have something done quickly, versus, to William's point, let something sit on your desk a little too long, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, I got to get this done. And then you put everybody in a bad position.